Most dungeon masters suck at combat.
That's right, I said it. No questions.
Actually, I'm going to be answering why that is and how to fix it. I'm going to give you guys today 5 tips to become a better dungeon master at running combat. But before we get into why, we got to have a little message from our sponsor.
Psych, you thought there's no sponsor today. Today's video is sponsored by me. And Mio, actually no, that's not true. It's sponsored by the patrons on Patreon.
That is right. My patrons sponsor all of my videos. So if you'd like to get all my videos 24 hours early, or perhaps, mayhaps, you'd like to support the channel, please check out the link in my description. That is all. Let's get into why most DMs suck at combat now. If you are a dungeon master who finds himself uncomfortable running combat, or you personally think that you can work on it, or maybe you just want to brush up on some stuff and see what others have to say, this video is for you. If you hate combat, this video is still for you. Don't think I forgot about you, David. I'm watching you. Now, in my experience, from what I can tell, most dungeon masters are not very good at combat for a very simple reason. They don't know the rules, or at least feel like they don't know the rules of combat. And to that I say, tip number 1, review the rules of combat. This may seem like a very basic rule, but at least attempting to tackle reading the rules really helps with your confidence when it comes to making calls and DMing. Remember, you don't have to be a perfect dungeon master. You just have to be good enough that your players don't notice. So having the ability to confidently make rulings will make your combats that much smoother. For instance, someone trying to get an opportunity attack and then cast a spell at the same time and they don't have Warcaster, you can confidently say, no, you can't do that. That is not how that works. Or if someone, for example, is confused and is trying to figure out how casting a spell works, you can walk them through it and guide your players through the scenario confidently. Especially with newer players, it is very important that you as the dungeon master have a very firm grasp of those combat rules. So reviewing the rules prior to session, whether it be in your favorite YouTube video or just looking up the rules themselves, can greatly enhance how your combats are run. Number 2. Most dungeon masters, when they DM, struggle with their combat encounters with balancing and end up making encounters that are either wickedly too hard or insanely easy. To this, I would like to say that this is not your fault necessarily, at least design-wise. The combat in 5th edition, if you're using the CR system to balance your encounters, that's your first mistake. The CR system in Dungeons & Dragons, the challenge rating system, is absolutely busted. For those who don't know what it is, it's this little number that is on all of the monster stat sheets that means the following. A party of this equal average level of roughly 4 to 5 people will probably die to this thing. And if anyone has ever run a single D&D combat, you know that is strictly not true. For example, here is my monster manual that I have. I'm gonna flip to a random page. An ancient white dragon, supposedly a CR 20 creature, meaning that 4 level 20 adventurers are probably going to struggle against this. It's got 333 HP. A level 20 wizard can kill this in 1 round. Not to mention the rest of the party. It'll look something like... yeah. It'll be an absolute smackdown. So throw out the CR system. Stop using the CR system. The CR system was implemented at the beginning of 5th edition. The sooner you can chuck out the CR system, the better. And if you want even more reason to use the CR system, the creator of the game, Jeremy Crawford, doesn't even use the CR system, okay? It's bullshit. Just throw it out. Get rid of it. Number 3, read the spell section. Now, this is probably the most dauntingly easy task I can give you. However, it is arguably the one that's going to take the longest. This is my player's handbook. The player's handbook is 291 pages long. 90 of those pages are dedicated to the spells. A third of the PHB is just spells. Spellcasting, I could say arguably, makes up then a third of the game. Know all of them. I know I'm being facetiously angry right now, But knowing the spells in D&D is going to drastically improve your gameplay experience as both a dungeon master and a player. Everyone should read the spell section and know all of the spells. That way, as a dungeon master, you don't get blindsided by some ridiculous player character combo that turns your big boss into a big pile of goo. Knowing the options that your players have access to is more than half the battle. I highly encourage everybody to read the spell section just to brush up on what possible things you can run into. I can safely say that as soon as I started looking at, as I finished reading the spell section of both the Player's Handbook, Xanathar's Guide, Tasha's, all of the books, I got better at DMing. Simply because I knew what stuff was coming. I knew how to prepare better. I knew what stuff I was most likely going to run into. I knew what spells are good picks. Knowing what spells are good options is super important.
Number 4!
Change the purpose of why you're running combat. Most dungeon masters that I've heard of run combat for the purposes of trying to injure the player characters. And while you could argue that is the point of combat, I think that you can drastically improve the combat experience by focusing on something else. Resources. Dungeons and Dragons is a game of resource expenditure. The faster that you can expend the player character's resources, the better off your fights are going to be. The point of combat is not to kill the players, it's to make them spend resources. To make the bard cast polymorph so that the next fight they don't have polymorph. To make the fighter action surge so that they have to take a short rest, which gives you a reason to put more enemies in the next encounter because they're more prepared. Dungeons and Dragons is a game of resources. And if you make the players use their resources, your combats are going to be more difficult. Nickel and dime them for resources in combat. Study your player character's character sheets and look what's on there. The bard has got polymorph. That means that they're most likely going to be using that spell to target my big monsters. If I give the big monster legendary resistances, they are therefore going to be wasting more resources on the legendary resistances. The wizard's got a ton of damage spells. Okay, give them a big wall of meat to throw themselves at so that they are spending all of their time just trying to punch through it and not spending their time controlling the battlefield. Dungeons and Dragons is a game of resources, and if you change your focus from trying to injure the players or kill them to trying to make them spend resources, you're going to have more fun, your players are going to have more fun, and your combats are going to feel a lot more dynamic because the threat isn't just the physical damage their characters are taking, the threat is them spending resources. The threat is them running out.
I don't actually want to throw my chair, but point number 5!
Learn how to homebrew. Now, I personally do not like homebrewing classes very much because I think that the class combos that are present within D&D are already so useful and so powerful that you can make almost any character concept come to life with what's already there. And oftentimes I find that homebrew is, if I'm being honest, usually weaker than the standard published options. But when it comes to homebrewing monsters, let me tell you, homebrewing monsters is an art, and you should get good at it. The monsters that are present in the Monster Manual, Volo's Guide, Mordenkainen's Tomb of Foes, they're great. They're great starting blocks. They teach you a lot of the tools and tricks that allow you to eventually make better monsters, but you shouldn't be using only these books. I understand that there's many different types of tables out there that all have very different needs. Maybe you're a dungeon master that, frankly, you don't have time. You work 2 jobs, have a family, you don't have time to be poring over these books, making interesting new fights every time. And in that case, use the Monster Manual. It's good. I don't want to disparage it. But if you have the time, if you are interested in making better combats, if you are interested in making more dynamic fights for your players, take this thing as the building block to far greater heights. For example, something that you can do is you can look at the Monster Manual abilities that are already there and mix and match them to make new monsters. Or something that I personally like, take class options and give them to monsters. Who said that your monsters can't have action surge? I don't know. Nobody. Use it. It's hilarious. Creating new monsters to make a dynamic fights is going to improve your play experience by a great deal. For example, I recently designed a fight that was roughly based off of a dragon. It was a dragon spellcaster. And the main point of this dragon spellcaster was that all I wanted to do damage with was my breath weapon. And while I was waiting for my breath weapon to recharge, I wanted to nickel and dime the players for resources. It had tons of spell slots that it exclusively used for counterspell. And every time it successfully counterspelled, it got the spell slot back. Additionally, you couldn't overpower its counterspell by simply casting it at a higher level. You had to roll for every single counterspell. This boss ended up being a nightmare for my players. Not an annoying, well, it was annoying. Not a one that made the players hate the game. It was one that was interesting because the players had to figure out a new approach. I only had one counterspell per round, so they needed to think about what were they going to bait me into using my counterspell for? How could they reserve their resources? How many legendary actions could I use up on different stuff before they got to use their stuff? It became an interesting game of trying to manage their resources rather than just trying to put as much bedonkers damage and effects on the monster until it died. And every 3 turns, I hit them with a massive damage breath weapon that stole their spell slots. I wanted them to run out of resources. I didn't want them to lose all their health. Admittedly, they would eventually, but I wanted them to feel the pressure of losing resources. And that monster you will not find anywhere. You won't find it in the monster manual, you won't find it online because I made it. And those fights that you tailor to your players are always going to be better than ones that you don't. But those are all the tips that I have for you today. I hope young dungeon masters out there, if you saw this, you can take some of the tips that I gave and use them to improve in your own games. There are tons of different ways to make good dynamic combats. These are just the ways that I've personally found have worked. There's like a little extra tip. Don't worry too much about making super crazy battle map tactics. Those can work in some games, as does everything I've just mentioned. Do what you can, is I guess the end, the final statement I want to leave y'all with. But that is all for today. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked this video, please remember to like and subscribe. Remember to like and subscribe. Bing the bell. Tell all of your friends. Send this to your dungeon master or dungeon masters. Send this to your players. Get the fuck out of my house.